Friends and enemies, welcome back. Tuesday night. It's me, yours truly, Joey here, solo, at least as far as the CBP roster. I'm going to be joined by Daniel Hess shortly at More Births on Twitter. Recent recipient of the coveted, the elusive Elon Musk retweet. Dan has done a lot of work on birth rates around the world, specifically in the Western world. The decline in birth rates, what it means for the countries that are experiencing these demographic collapses, as he just said before we went live here. And we're going to talk about Canada tonight. Canada's in a situation I think many of you are finding out the hard way is not great for family formation. So we're going to talk about that. First, let's not waste any time. Get into the sponsors. Easy DNS, Mark and the team, the best in the business, the friendly neighborhood registrar. If you want to buy a website, port a website, a domain, I should say. Website is just such a layman way to speak. You can do it with Mark. It's cheap. It's easy. Mark will help you do that. Once you have the website, the domain registered, pointing somewhere for your business, for your blog, for pictures of your feet, I don't know, whatever you want. Mark will help you set up a number of other options there, a suite of available services, specifically for Bitcoiners. Virtual private server stuff is a favorite. A lot of you guys using it for Nostr relays, Bitcoin nodes, virtual private servers, also good for BTC Pay server implementations, nodeless implementations. Can't beat it. That's, one of the things that we try and do on the show, as you guys know, is work with people and partner with people and companies who are true to the Bitcoin mission, and we'll make sure that you are not only taken care of, but getting the highest quality service, product, whatever. And we think Mark does that. So go over. CBP Media is the code. You get half off your first round of buys with Mark. I guarantee once you start, you're not going to go anywhere else. No one does. Second sponsor, Bull Bitcoin. Again, best in class when it comes to Bitcoin exchanges, places to buy Bitcoin, use Bitcoin in Canada, probably the world, but Canada for sure. You can go there and buy on the cheap, great spreads. You guys know all this already. Non-custodial, no fear of rugging. Can't beat that. Not only do you have all those things, but the bills platform there means you can spend your Bitcoin on things like your mortgage, things like your cell phone bill. Maybe if it was up to Dan, things like diapers and baby formula. I don't know. We're going to find out. You can do all that stuff about Bitcoin. Use the code. I think it's CBP Media there too, but I don't know. It's in the description. Go there, sign up, start buying. The price is just over 60K. We are so resilient in price over the last month or two. With rate cuts around the corner, you really can't beat where I think this thing is going, and I think you guys think it's going there too. That's not financial advice, just something floating around in my brain. Anyway, go there, sign up, spend some money, get $20. You can't beat that. And then the third sponsor, Decentral Tech. New BitAxe firmware dropped today. I just saw Scott tweeting about it. So if you've been having problems with your BitAxe firmware, go update. Don't forget. As far as the company, Decentral, they got all your mining needs taken care of. Whether you want to do a little home mining that your wife's not going to be mad about, whether you want to do some home mining that your wife's for sure going to be mad about, whether you want to do some home mining at a level where your neighbors will be concerned and be calling bylaw, or whether you want to do some home mining at a level where your garage is no longer for cars, but rather for hashing. These guys will help you. If you got a board that needs repair, you want to pick something up, you want to do a little hobby mining, whatever, they're the best in class yet again. And they even have a way for you to buy hash power, which is if you want to do some hosting, that's great too. You can do all that stuff with them. So go over. We don't have a promo code. We got to get one. But in the meantime, don't be shy. Pick up a BitAxe. I know a couple of you guys have already done it. I plan on doing it as well. And we're looking forward to seeing where that partnership goes. Daniel Hess is here. How did it feel to get the Musk retweet? Were you ready for that? What is that? What is that like? Was it a celebration where you popped?
I was jumping up and down because, I actually, I wasn't shocked in some sense because, I'm very active in the, talking about the birth rate crisis and solutions. And this is something that Elon Musk is very, very serious about. So in that sense, but still, it's awesome. I got it happened twice actually. First it was for something that was just talking about some data about the crisis, and another was a long essay that I wrote about why liberals need to care about the fertility crisis. And the first one got more than 50 million views, which is a huge amount. So that was pretty exciting, but it reminded me that this is a very, very, very serious topic. It's because this is so serious and he's so focused on the future of humanity that converged.
He's extremely focused to the tune of, I think, 8 kids, right? Is he? He's out there swinging at every pitch, to put it lightly. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. He said he wants to be an example. He said he wants to be an example for people, and that's right, because He's about the future, but there is no future if people aren't having kids. And one of the most strange things is that as people get more technologically advanced and so forth, somehow that people are having fewer and fewer kids in the very countries that we rely on for technology. And it almost seems like the more advanced a country is, like the lower its birth rate. For example, the two of the most high tech countries are like Taiwan and South Korea. Those two countries like make pretty much 100% of like the AI chips. Lots of other things, but 100% of the AI chips of the future, and they have the lowest birth rates in the world. So it's terrifying.
You're going to talk to us a bit about that, among other things. I want to maybe first start with a little bit of your background. I don't know how Daniel Hess got into this rabbit hole. It's an important one, like you mentioned, and I think one that you may, as sort of a, even the normie, let's say, not worried about birth rate per se, can identify as a problem, whether because immigration levels are extremely high, whether because pressures are piling up other places thanks to the low birth rate. They're able to at least identify there's a problem. But I'm not sure how you got to where you are in terms of doing all this work and research and sharing your research so broadly. What brought you to this silo?
Well, originally, yeah, so this will be interesting to you, but I was interested in investing. And I'm 45 years old. I'm a father of 6. So I just, yeah, thank you. My wife can't keep her hands off. No, I'm just kidding. If I say that, everybody who knows me laughs. So they, but yeah. So maybe about 20 years ago, I was really interested in investing, but something that really struck me is that investing kind of floats on top of like the tectonic movements of demography. Like so there's a world underneath that. And you look at a country like Japan. Japan was high tech. They were supposed to take over the world, right? In 1990, like most of the like biggest market cap companies in the world were Japanese. Now, among the top 500, there's like 2 of them, or at least among the top 100, it's like 2 Japanese companies. So, what happened? They when you have an aging society that's not making enough new workers, things start to wind down, and the same kind of virtuous cycle that you get when you get population growth, which is more technology, like more investment, everything feeding on itself and climbing higher and higher and higher. Imagine that in reverse. Imagine, and you can think about it in a lot of ways, but one example is, housing. If there's fewer people every year, housing, maybe that'd be nice in Canada, right? if housing actually came down, but you have places in rural Japan, because everybody in Japan is moving to Tokyo and rural Japan is emptying out. You have places where like these houses like sell for like $1, but nobody even buys them, and they just fall apart, which I guess in Canada you'd probably just like cry to like imagine such a thing, because like you have like a little shack in like, what is it, in Vancouver, there's like one point I seen that the way like this Roach Motel is like $1.8 million. Like
it's a charming fixer upper, the realtors would say. Yeah. Great community.
No, but that's a different issue which we can talk about in a little bit.
I'm looking forward to that. So I before we started, you shared your screen. I accidentally removed it from the available slides. So I'll get you to do that one more time. And while you're doing that, I will just note to people that this podcast is like 80% probably listened to on audio. So the chances are you're listening to this on audio because you haven't given this a second thought. I will tell you that where you need to go is to YouTube for this, because Dan has tons of good data. Actually, I watched his appearance on Stefan Livera's podcast some time ago, I think a month or two at this point. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Dan on, because we get a lot of guests who are really, really good speakers, but don't bring a lot of data to show, even though I don't have any doubts the data exists. But this is it's stark. And I think it's important that we look at this data as we speak. So we're going to talk a bit about Canada. We're going to talk about fertility. And Dan, I know you said to me before the show, you have the big 4 sort of reasons for declining birth rates. I know you say Canada. I would assume that's the case actually in a lot of countries. this
Well,
sort of
yeah.
lack of religion and whatnot. Why don't we talk about those? Give me the big four and we'll go from there.
Okay, so I would say the big four for Canada, and I want to emphasize that it's like a little bit different in different countries. Um, you know, for example, just to give you a comparison, uh, like Spain and Italy have this weird problem where everybody lives at home until they're like 35 or 40 years old. So I mean, we joke about that, but like that's like a thing in Italy where like you have like these grown men who are like in almost approaching middle age, like still
Hey, nothing wrong with Italians living at home. Come on, menage la misère. Hey, come on, huh?
no, but so the issues are a little bit different in different countries. So, but what I want, but the four issues that I've identified as the biggest factors in Canada are number one, declining religiosity. Canada actually used to be a pretty religious country. Now it is that is very much less the case. Marriage. Canadians have a significantly lower marriage rate than the United States. Um, Another big factor for Canada specifically is you have this immigration driven housing crisis, which is just sending house prices through the roof. And I mean, this will be no surprise to any of your Canadian listeners, but it is extremely difficult to afford a house in Canada, or probably feels impossible for most people. Another fourth factor for Canada in particular is political liberalism, and liberal beliefs are associated with lower birth rates. And if Canada were a U.S. state, it would be like more liberal than Vermont, for example. So there's kind of an ideological aspect to it as well. So those I would say are the four biggest factors that I would identify for Canada.
So I want to dive into those. I have a bunch of notes here that I've, taken over the last couple of days and just things that have come to my mind. I'm 36. I've been with my wife for, I don't know, 12 years at this point. We have our first kid on the way. So I'm working on, yeah,
big congratulations.
I'm working on Hess numbers. Okay. But I'm not quite there
All
yet.
right. Okay, good.
And,
No, don't stop.
So I'm thinking to myself over the last few days, what contributed to the situation I'm in at 36? My wife just turned 35 a few days ago, having our first kid now. And part of me says that the reason was based on money. You mentioned my sort of proclivity to want to stay at home, thanks to my heritage. I appreciate you bringing that up, something I've never heard before, of course. And, one of the other things I think is that there was a big time and quick cultural change in the nature of courtship and relationships. And I'm pointing specifically to things like Tinder and the way it amplifies something like the Pareto principle, and the way that it makes it seem like the grass is always greener. And there's just so much grass everywhere you look, thanks to stuff like Tinder and Instagram. And I didn't hear you mention that. I think maybe that falls under liberal sort of mores,
I don't
but
know.
you tell me.
That is, I didn't mention that because I was trying to identify things particular to Canada,
Right.
and I don't know that Canada is particularly different in that regard. But it's a problem everywhere, and a lot of it, um, there's several causes. People wait much longer to commit because they think they have infinite options.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it. There's the fact that people set their standards extremely high, or they think that they are everything in a bag of chips, right? And so everybody thinks that they're a 10. They're all a bunch of fives thinking that they're 10s. I mean, am I right?
You're right.
This is a little bit before, these apps didn't exist when I was, when I was that age. And I was actually introduced by a pastor at church to my wife, and we got to know each other that way, which I would highly, the old ways were actually much better in a lot of ways. They're more comfortable. You also had kind of social verification that this person is not a weirdo, or not just that, but that they're serious, because you could have somebody who's some guy who's been with 20 women in the last year, and each one he can tell her that she's the one.
Yes.
And and she doesn't know otherwise.
Yes.
But if this comes out of a social circle, where he'll do that twice, and everybody will know what kind of guy he is. But in this kind of anonymous dating app world, those kinds of people can kind of, pull tricks on women without ever getting identified for not being a serious person, or vice versa.
I think that's true. I also would I would add to that there is a certain social proof that comes with going into a situation with your friends, or as you did, being introduced by a mutual friend. And when you go through something like that and meet someone like that and get to know someone like that, there's a certain level of investment that you've undertaken in order to grow that relationship. And I think it sort of speaks to this phrase, this old adage that the grass is actually greener where you water it, as opposed to
Oh
growing up
wow! Oh
differences,
wow!
right?
That's a great
Yeah, and so I think
great
that
line.
a lot of
Great line.
people, I met my wife the old-fashioned way too, even though I was sort of raised in the app era. It's funny, looking at or hearing some of the things you say. Man, I've said this so many times. I think it's true for guys and girls. I don't think it's necessarily just women who are who have their standards set too high, or just men that have their standards set too high. As you mentioned, I think everyone has a good 2 weeks on Tinder and thinks that they are the cream of the crop, when really, they are sort of the probably middle of the pack type, as
Yeah,
as
yeah.
is as is the case almost always, right? On average, everyone is average, as the saying
Right,
goes.
right. And
And
I've heard, and again, these apps are, thankfully I managed to get off the market before this thing, completely exploded. But um, particularly for young women, I it's my understanding that there are some guys out there in particular that may just use it to date a lot of women, and
yes,
and these women, therefore see how easy it is and get the wrong impression, because these guys, these are not guys that would settle down and marry these women, but they get a very different impression.
yeah, they there's some I'm not even gonna say it on the air because probably it'll rub some people the wrong way, which is something I've done fairly frequently, but on this topic a little more dicey. Let's get into Canada. You have a chart up here: total fertility rate, children per woman. We are under the replacement rate, which is 2.1. My
Oh,
understanding is we are
yes.
way under the replacement rate. Is that
So,
correct?
so Canada. Okay, I have bad news. I'm sorry to say, I have very bad
Okay.
news. I mean, Canada is like in the lowest of low countries. I mean, you hear about like a country like Japan. Okay, so Canada is the red line on this chart. You can see it compared to the United States. So that's a really kind of a good comparison. And Canada's recent numbers for 2023 was 1.25 births per woman. So replacement is around 2.1. So what we're talking about is Canada is barely a little more than half of replacement. So it's, so by natural, childbearing, each generation would be almost a little more than half the size of the one before it, which is, and here you can see it against the United States. Canada used to be, for the first half of the 20th century and for a lot of its history, it used to be a very, very fertile country where women had a lot of children, more than the United States even during the first half of the 20th century. And then it kind of tracked with the United States until like around 1980. And since it's been lower, and lately, so America's around 1.65, just to give you a comparison. So
Mhm.
1.25, that's a lot lower. That's like lower than even Japan now, if you can imagine that. So one of this is in the category of very, very low birth rates now, and it's really just plummeted in just the last 3 or 5 years. So it's gotten a lot worse.
So I assume that when we talk about these big four, maybe we can go to your next slide or your next screen. I think that you're going to tell me that the reason for this sort of, well, I mean, it's not even sort of, the rather steep decline in fertility really is based on housing to begin with, probably also waiting too long to start families and not being able to have more than one kid, thanks to the cost of housing, thanks to the need to sort of settle down and have two incomes, for example, or move for work, or sort of begin and flourish in your career in a way that makes it make sense to have kids. It's frustrating to me to see stuff like this, because I know that here in Canada, we've done some things in terms of subsidy and incentive stuff, the baby bonus, for example. A lot of people talk about that.
Oh yeah, so that's an interesting point, which is that actually, um, Canada is way more generous than the United States, for example.
Yeah.
The United States has like already now 0.4 births per woman more than Canada, so way higher. Even
Mhm.
though I saw one thing where Canada is like the fourth best country to raise a child in terms of like sort of the benefits you get, free childcare and stuff like
Dan
that.
threw up the air quotes there. I was about to do the same thing, so I'm glad he did it.
You know,
Yeah.
but no, it's not. You know, obviously the cost of living in terms of housing especially is a very, which I'm going to get to, but the a bigger point is that culture, you know, is a way bigger factor than policy. In other words, uh, whether people go to church on Sunday uh, is going to have a much bigger impact on their birth rate than than any childcare incentives. So here we see a picture of weekly religious attendance in Canada over time. It's been just dropping steadily. Canada used to be, as I said, a very religious country. Actually, I don't know how much young people realize that in Canada, but so I'll show something else. Compare that. We can see. Um, so so here I'll just share another
Sure.
chart here.
This is, well, you're pulling that up. It's interesting. When I think about my own upbringing and all my friends' upbringings, we met, and I would say courted, especially as we got into our teen years, a lot of other women who are friends of families that we all went to church with. I mean, I was raised Roman Catholic. I went to church every Saturday or Sunday for basically my whole life until I went to university, which, if I had to guess, if I had to sort of pin down your line of thinking here, university is really the time where you want to be going to church the most, or continue going to church, maybe when it's the most consequential to continue attending religious ceremonies, because that's when you're starting to enter your years of potential family formation,
Oh yeah,
vis-a-vis
oh
picking
yeah.
a
So
long-term partner, right?
that's a great point. I had another thing that I don't know if you can see it
I
or.
see it. Yeah. Sorry. I'm kind of
Okay,
like
here we go.
daydreaming here, looking
Oh no, no
around.
problem, no problem. It's all good. But yeah, you can see this relates to the other chart, which is that we saw that religious attendance is dropping, but the frequency, this is looking, I think, at uh, fertility preferences. I think for women, uh, and the more often, the higher church attendance is associated with much higher desired fertility. So women
Yeah.
who attend church uh, are more likely to have a lot more children. And the reason, there's a lot of reasons. One is that, you just have this community that is much more family centric. People who go to church are actually uh, a lot happier. There's this crisis ever since COVID, or maybe before that, um, of young people being like unbelievably depressed, and like it blows my mind if you see the statistics where like a quarter of high school students like contemplated suicide or something like that.
Wow.
It's just this. It's a very sad, and you're not even like me. You're not even one of the kids these days anymore. I mean,
No.
there's a younger generation coming up. It's not, the millennials are actually not the young. There's generation Z, and then there's a generation Alpha after that, and things are, these generations are doing very poor psychologically. They're just very sad a lot, and one of the strongest things in the data is that people who have regular religious attendance are a lot happier, and that's a big reason, uh, a big reason there um, why people who have religious attendance tend to have higher birth rates. There's a strong association between happiness and how many, whether people will have a family. People who are very depressed are unlikely to do these things. So there's a real value there. People have been getting away from that, but it is to the detriment of people. And Canada is a prime example of that. But that's, the loss of religion is something that's been happening in America. Maybe to a little bit lesser extent, it's been happening big time in Europe. So these even these countries like Italy and uh, Spain and Poland that we think of as highly religious countries, not so much for young people, and the result is that birth rates are totally crashing. So in those countries as well. So I will. So another, next factor is sort of the marriage rate, which I'm gonna.
This is directly tied to religion, and I would guess religious sort of attendance is the wrong word, but maybe a religious disposition, we'll call it.
Maybe I don't know. Marriage. Some religiosity will incline people to marriage, but there's some. There's some. There it's part of it's just culture. Like Europe has this weird thing where people tend to just not get married, even if they're a couple. And that's Canada. So the marriage rate in Canada is like only about like 55 or 60% of what it is in the United States. So people in the United States are, so 7.3 marriages per 1,000 people per year or something like that versus 4.6 for Canada.
That is so low, Dan. That is incredibly low.
Yeah. So, and here's the thing. The thing about marriage is that, a lot of people will act or talk like it's an outdated institution, but even like very, very liberal people are much more likely to want to have kids if they're married. It's just you just feel much more secure and much more stable. And, one thing about the modern world is that like accidental pregnancy like almost doesn't exist anymore.
That's right.
Like it used to be that like people would just, there was hardly any birth control, not very good birth control, and people just fell in love, and then just babies just happened, and then these young people had to figure out, they had to like have a shotgun wedding or something, figure out, make things work. But now birth control is so good that people will not have children unless they feel like things are perfect. And so even for very, very liberal people, they are much, much more likely to have children if they are married. So the drop in marriage rate, even though people are thinking it's an antiquated institution, I would say that marriage is like more important than ever because people are getting so good at avoiding unintended pregnancy that the only type of pregnancy that you get anymore is like intended pregnancy, and that usually means in marriage. So even for very, very liberal people, marriage is kind of almost the only case where they'll actually have kids.
I will share a personal story here that I haven't shared before, and I'm sharing it because I want to get your opinion on fertility, the issue with aging females, and the issue with birth control. My wife and I, like I mentioned, we're a little older, mid-30s. We started trying to have kids 2 years ago almost. And, for those of you who don't know what that looks like, it looks like your wife incredibly stressed out, peeing on a stick, waiting for lines, waiting for readings, looking at apps, everything short of looking at the phase of the moon. But honestly, I'm not sure she didn't do that too.
God bless you. I mean, you say that moves my heart. I mean, my heart goes just because that's so anxious, so much anxiety there.
It's anxiety, but like, as an aside, it's relationship building, right? A relationship needs those anxious moments and periods where you're both looking to build something greater than yourselves. I mean, I could go down this road for a long time, but we spent 2 years trying to get pregnant, Dan. And, one of the things that both our doctors told us as we were taking these tests, blood tests, I'm shooting swimmers into containers and taking them to places I've never been before, making sure everything's okay.
Yeah.
All you keep hearing is everything's good. And they keep telling you that you just got to keep trying. Okay. My wife was on birth control probably for longer than she was off of it. I would imagine she went on at 14 or 15, like most women do these days. And it took her almost a full 2 years for her cycle to regulate again, to have this sort of consistent 28-day, cycle that everyone talks about. And once the cycle regulated, it took us 2 months to get pregnant. I don't know if that's directly attributable to the time on birth control, nor do I know if it's directly attributable to environmental stress. We were going through a move. We had a sick dog. We had just gotten married. We were thinking about a lot of different things for that 2 years, as most couples do. I think that's a pretty big period of building for a lot of modern day couples. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. You tell me if you have an answer for it. I have it in my notes here that we are not doing a good job telling young men and women when their fertile window begins and when it begins to get more difficult for them. Instead, what we're doing, especially in Canada, is giving hormonal birth control to very young women, half of the school board, here in Canada is Catholic. There's a whole Catholic school board and other religious school boards who preach abstinence before marriage. And, there's a number of different sort of vehicles for telling kids, do not put yourself in a position where you're going to have a kid. It borders on propaganda. I think there's value in it sometimes, but the result here, as your charts have shown, and as I'm sure that you think, the result has been, I would guess, a net negative. Now, tell me something. In your research and in your travels, let's say, have you given any thought to when and what we should be telling kids about fertility? And I'm not saying that we got to start getting kids married at 14, 15, 16. Not at all. What I'm actually saying is you should be telling kids that at 18, if they want to have a family, the goal should be to start settling down and finding a partner, not to be, it's a difficult topic to tackle, but I'm sure that you thought about this.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that almost the people hardly realize is that unintended childlessness is more common now than unplanned pregnancy. So all of sex ed, all of health class is like dedicated to avoiding like the terrible calamity of an unplanned pregnancy. But it's actually much more common now for people to want to have a child and not be able to in their life than to have a child by accident that they didn't want. So everything has been focused on avoiding pregnancy when the opposite problem now is actually much bigger. So I think young people need to be educated, very clearly in high school health class about the fertility window, about about the fact that you're at that many men and women who want to be parents, that is not going to happen because mostly because they didn't find a partner and settle down and try early enough, and actually the time to be meeting somebody and settling down and starting to have a family is actually best in the 20s. Fertility is far higher in the 20s than in the 30s. I mean, I can share a personal anecdote myself. I mean, we our oldest is 17, our youngest is 2, so we have a big spread there. But when my wife was 24 and I was 26 when we were newly married, it was so easy. I mean, it was like 1 month. And then the next one, we're going to wait a little while. Nope, no, I guess we're not going to wait a little while. And then so like the first 3 were like in 4 years, and it was really easy. And then for our last one, I think we were trying for 3 years. That's like 36 months or something.
Yeah.
And this is the same people that had been like insanely fertile, just, a decade earlier. We were like borderline infertile, like as we were near 40.
Yeah.
So that just goes to show that, time and age, especially age of the woman, but age of men and women both, is a huge factor that young people need to be educated on. That'll make a huge difference.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I think it's so important. And, I've said to kids I've coached over the years that finding a good woman and finding a good place to live and finding a good, a good balance to build a relationship is huge. One thing I've said on the show before, I think that, you mentioned that people are staying at home later. I'd be curious to hear what you think about this. In my view, there's been sort of an uptick in people staying home for the wrong reasons. They can't afford to move out. They can't find jobs. The education they got is completely worthless. Underwater basket weaving for $60K a year in some US colleges.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Yeah. Crazy. Right. And one of the other sort of viewpoints I have, the thing I think is becoming more common is good parents, boomer parents, will have their kids stay home longer, basically friction free, very little rent, if anything, tons of freedom, a meal every night, a roof over their head. And, all the beer in the fridge is yours if you want it. And I think they do this for a few reasons. They want to have a say in the 3 most important decisions in their kid's life: where they live, where they work, and who they end up marrying. Is that a good thing or a bad thing for fertility in your view? Have you given that any thought? This idea that kids stay home and they get influenced by their parents, is that just another filter that they have to get through? Is that dragging things out? What do you make of that?
I mean, in the data, and there's a great demographer, Lyman Stone, who's done, some good work on it. And Brian Kaplan is another one. He had a post a couple years back on his blog called Basement Fertility, which the point is that like the lowest fertility, of anyone, like is if you live in your parents' house. You just have people who live in their parents' house just have the lowest fertility, and I think it looks kind of unimpressive for a girl for if the guy is living with his parents.
I'll tell my wife. Yeah, I'll let her know.
So anyway, I'm if it no, and there's no one factor that is the only factor. I mean, meeting somebody is obviously the biggest factor of all, and pertaining to that, I think that people really need to be thinking about college, and that's a time when people need to be making a partnership.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. Which of the big four do you want to go next? We did religiosity, the religious.
We did marriage.
We did marriage. Maybe the liberal, the increased.
I'll just maybe. Well, let me see.
You pick. This is a fun conversation because I went through this myself. I'm not that far removed from some of these thoughts. I have friends who are still single, still childless. And so I'm not surprised to hear some of this stuff, but all the same, oh my God, the housing! I've seen this chart before.
Yeah, this is very if you're a Canadian, I mean, this is
avert your eyes.
This is a very painful thing because I mean I can't even imagine. I mean, as I was joking that a tiny little house is in Vancouver. This is a meme like all over the world that this tiny little cracker box in Vancouver for $1 million, $2 million, but it's an awful situation if you're a young person, and the reason for this is an extremely high level of immigration in Canada that's completely outstripping the housing. I mean, there just isn't enough housing, so that's just crushing. That's just crushing birth rates because if people don't feel like they can get a place, then it's gonna they're just that's just a really negative factor. And there is another problem related to housing, which I'm gonna show next here.
Okay, I have some questions about housing and incentives when you're finished on your housing point. I think this is a big one. It's one we talk about on the show a lot, although not through this lens. And so I'm interested in hearing what else you have to say on this.
So yeah, there's another thing that Canada's doing, which is I think kind of not helping and making things, kind of worse in the long run, which is that Canada has Canada has a long tradition, like America, of suburban houses, suburban homes, which is really that's kind of the gold standard in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Because you still need to be probably near a city if you want a decent job, but actually suburban homes where you just have a house with a yard around it, a single family home, is ideal. Actually, the birth rates for those types of houses are much, much larger than apartments, but Canada is throwing up these high-rise towers like crazy, like way more than the United States. There's like, this chart shows the level of house construction. So you can see that LA has like 9 high-rise towers under construction right now. In Toronto,
Canada.
It's 272 high-rises. It's just,
oh my God.
And the problem, I've written about this quite a bit, and I've kind of built a reputation on Twitter for being, vehemently anti high-rise apartment.
Okay, that is the comment on Lavera's show that made me reach out to you, because I could not agree more. Please continue, sir.
Yes. So, and I live in the Washington D.C. area, and I'm lucky enough to live in a single family home, although they're harder to come by in the DC area now. But I went to Bethesda and downtown Bethesda, downtown Rockville. If people know, those are kind of close in inner ring suburbs. They're kind of sought after zip codes. And I was looking around at a bunch of new high rise towers that had been built like in the last 4, 5, 6 years, and everything in there was 0 bedrooms, like a studio, 1 bedroom, or at most 2 bedrooms. And there were among four buildings that I visited. I was acting like I was a customer or something. And among 4 buildings that I visited, not a single one I acted like I needed a 3-bedroom apartment.
Wow.
And not one of them had a single 3-bedroom unit in the whole building. So they're just built. I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the United States, these apartment towers are only like for singles and couples, and not at all for families. Because look, if you have, say you have a 2-bedroom apartment, and you have 1 child and you want to have another one, and if they're opposite sex, then like you're legally like not allowed to put them in the same bedroom. So you like this is like an impossible situation. So it's, and if you look at the data, you look at like these East Asian cities that are like a sea of like high-rise apartment towers. These places have the, fertility rates of like 0.7 or 0.6 in places like Seoul or Shanghai or Beijing, or these places where everybody lives in an apartment tower. So this is a very, these apartment towers are very bad for fertility, and they're going to be around for 50, 60 years or more, driving down fertility for such a long time. So this is unfortunately a very negative thing to be doing. And so this is another factor that's probably, you have this immigration driven housing crisis because there's not enough, and instead of building family type houses that they need, they're throwing up high rises to try to solve the problem quickly, just get people in something. But it's very bad for families for a lot of reasons.
So let's talk about some of the reasons. In my head here, I can think of a few right away. One is they're just too small, like you mentioned, to have a family start up in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's not feasible. The second is, this is sort of a second order effect, but you tell me if you think I'm right or wrong on this. In Toronto, it takes an hour to drive anywhere minimum, which includes to the office. So you are up earlier to go to work, home later, and I would guess interested in your partner a little less, thanks to the added fatigue and time spent on the commute. That's another cause. Part of me also thinks that, there's something to this idea that animals don't breed in captivity. And I don't think anybody wants to live, sort of your soul hungers for more than a 1-bedroom studio apartment type thing. And it affects your mood, sexual desires, and maybe just also your biological fertility. What do you think is really driving the fertility down in these places? What is the correlation in your view between number of high rises and fertility rate?
Yeah, I think there's several factors. I mean, one of them is if kids are, and you're about to experience this, so, but kids are, very noisy and very, if you had to, like share a wall on all 4 sides with other people, and you have a screaming toddler, like you're going to feel really, really bad about this situation. I mean, they're going to hate, your neighbors are going to be really pissed at you, and you're going to feel like terrible all the time because you're screaming toddler, but all toddlers are like this. And, so I think actually it feels very bad to like be in this situation where, and who's, if you think you're, who's going to have like 3, 4, 5, 6 kids in an apartment? Nobody will do that because,
Yeah.
your neighbors will, by that time, your neighbors will actually murder you. No, I mean, I'm joking, but it's very, I mean, the data shows that very few people have very few children in high rise. And I think that's a big reason. It's just, it just feels very uncomfortable. I mean, family is a very private activity, and a lot of that privacy is because kids are, really noisy, and you need to kind of create a space where they won't, a place with a yard, so you can just have like a sound barrier.
This is clearly the case. And I want to press this idea of, incentives around family formation. Because like, as I mentioned earlier, and you said it too, Canada is extremely generous with parents. You get this baby bonus. There's all kind of tax breaks for you. We just introduced like $10 a day childcare. I don't know really if that's a legit thing or if it's just something that's campaigning or on the campaign trail for the Liberals. But I'm
I
curious
do
if
want
you
to say
think,
that is these are good things. I don't want to disparage
yeah, but
that.
are we incentivizing the right thing, Dan? Like the thing I have in my notes here, and these are just like, sort of flow of consciousness over the last few days, but shouldn't we be incentivizing new married couples trying to buy single family homes? Isn't that the thing we should be giving money to? Not, we're going to put you in a shoebox. If you manage to pop out a kid, we'll give you $300 or $400 every month until they're 18. It seems to me like they're putting the cart before the horse a little bit. And it's something that I think about a lot because we talk about economic incentives often on the show. And I think that we're always subsidizing the wrong step in the process. And this is another example in my view. Do you agree? Where do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing, I would say, our house with a yard. I mean, we have a third of an acre. It's nice. Uh, it's not amazing, but we have our own little piece of the kingdom. This is ours, and
Yeah.
the kids. I would say to some extent the house helps raise the kids. They can, you know, our 2-year-old can be in the in the carport or running around in the backyard, or he's got a sand table back there. He can just be back there by himself, for half an hour at a time, and it's fine. And or the 5-year-old can be doing whatever she wants to do, and we're within earshot, but we don't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's that this is there's this aspect. One reason I think that birth rates are dropping is there's this sort of high intensity parenting that was never the case like in the past. I mean, the kids would
Ah,
run around, come back when it gets dark, and we'll have dinner on the table if you come back in time, right? Now parents have travel teams, 100 different activities, but especially and I getting back to here, these apartment buildings, you know you don't even have a yard to play in, so that it's probably 10 times harder to be a parent because you have to constantly be taking the kids place and doing 100 different activities when somebody with a house and a yard can just let the kids
it's a great point.
run around and play.
Spoken like a man with experience. I would have never said that. I would have never written that down.
So yeah, I think, and I think the other point that you made about just density, there is something just about crowds. There was uh an experiment done in the 1960s. It was done like 5 miles from where I am right now. Over at one of the, I don't know if it was NIH or a similar thing, but they did this mouse. They called it Mouse Utopia, and they gave all the mice all the food they needed and everything that they needed, food and water and little compartments to live in, but they were very crowded.
Hmm.
And like the mice developed all sorts of like mental illnesses, and they were like all depressed and like sad, and they had like all sorts of like social problems, like very kind of similar to what people have today.
Yeah.
And so it really does seem like when crowding gets too much, people don't they don't thrive as well. So we seem to just need to spread out a little bit.
It's interesting to think about some of these things from the point of view of, someone in my shoes who's expecting to have a child in the next 3 months or 2 months, whenever my wife's due. I should know that. Thankfully, she doesn't watch the show. It's November 16th or 18th, one of those days. Um, and to hear from your point of view, something like the difficulty with raising a kid when you can't do any activities in your home and have to go somewhere all the time. Not only does that become time consuming, but it's, sort of part and parcel with this rising cost of living we're seeing everywhere. If everything you do has a dollar figure associated with it, as opposed to just a square footage figure associated with it,
Oh yeah, I
you're
mean,
in a world of hurt.
yeah, one the lowest birth rate country in the entire world is South Korea, and South Korea is like known for like this insanely intense parenting where kids have like these after school programs one after the other, like from like 4 p.m. until like midnight or something. So they're like hyper competitive, but the result is that it's so miserable for the kids, and it's so miserable for the parents. You get this kind of over parenting thing, which is a real problem. I mean,
Mhm.
if you make it, and this is kind of almost like self-imposed, so people actually have to kind of make a conscious decision kind of step off the parenting rat race a little bit. One of the worst things that something that I am like morally deeply opposed to is travel teams. And my good friend Tim Carney, who's an author here and a journalist here in the Washington area, he wrote a whole book where he started his book about talking about the scourge of travel teams, which I don't know if that's a big thing in Canada, but in the United States, people will.
It was huge when I was a kid. I was playing high level basketball up until I turned 18. I was somewhere every single weekend, multiple nights in the gym every week. Yeah, my brother, same thing.
Yeah, well,
Huge time consume.
in the United States, I don't. You can have people traveling like 3, 4, 5 states away, or
Oh my God.
My daughter is doing swimming. She qualified for a meet in Florida. We're in Maryland, and I just talked to my wife and said, we agreed we're not doing travel teams, and this is, so that because it's just such a burden on parents, and it's so expensive, and it's so exhausting, and that's it's not necessary. I mean, she goes to plenty of meets in our area, and that's she's not going to be in the Olympics.
Yeah, if Ledecky can do it in your area, then she can do it in your area too, right? It's like the
well,
standard.
No, she is no Katie Ledecky, who I think she just brought home 4 more medals for, that's amazing. But most kids they're just supposed to be doing it for fun. They're not future Olympians, and this. So parents have to kind of step back and make their own lives easier, and not think that their lives have to revolve around their kids to the point where their own lives are miserable. That's not the point of it.
Yeah, it sort of flies in the face of some other comments I hear from time to time. In Bitcoin, there's a huge chunk of the Bitcoin faithful who talk about family formation being the most important thing. And I don't know, what priority it deserves in the life of a 20-year-old or an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, whatever. But I know in the life of a 25 or 30-year-old, it should take a high priority. I'm wondering if you have a view on sort of I don't want to call the would-be or yet to be parents selfish, but is there something to that story that you hear sometimes, that parents just don't want the, inconvenience of a kid, the burden of a kid, because they're so accustomed to their lifestyle? I mean, you see on Instagram these dank videos of parents who are, I think, faking their satisfaction, going to yet another craft brewery and paying yet another $8 for a beer that's just a bit too hoppy, but you have to pretend to like it for the likes on social media. Is there something to that, or is that just a symptom of all these other things you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there is. I mean, and that gets to why I think is one reason why I think urban fertility is like so low. Because I was in Tokyo with my family in September of last year, so 11 months ago, and it's weird that all the young people all over Japan are all flocking to Tokyo, and they keep, which Tokyo has the lowest fertility in all of Japan, but like Tokyo has so many restaurants. You could eat at a different restaurant basically every night for your whole life. I mean, can you imagine that?
No.
So and I don't know. Eventually, you've had enough noodles of every kind, but or whatever, and enough of the Japanese style lunch boxes. I don't think they're all like that insanely different, but this that is a problem. This kind of kind of adult entertainments, and I'm not talking about like strip shows or something, but just like restaurants and dance clubs and stuff like that are you can just keep doing that, but what is the fulfillment and what is the meaning in that? I think that it's in the long run that's not where meaning will be found. And especially if you talk to older people in their 60s and 70s and beyond, the only thing that they want to talk about is like their children and grandchildren.
I know.
So we I think that's kind of a really misplaced priority. But there, we anyway, I said I was going to talk about another thing, which is kind of the political angle.
Yes,
So
I'm very interested in this. And then I know we're coming up on time. I'm going to force you to stay a little longer because I want you to give me some ideas for solutions to all this. Like, yeah, these are significant problems. It is, I think, the most important problem facing our civilization probably at this stage. And we got to figure it out.
Sure. Because if so here we see
Oh, this is gonna piss people off.
Oh
Oh my
yeah,
God,
no,
look at this.
this is this is the Donald Trump vote share for different counties like in the United States. And like, so counties that went like 80% for Trump have a fertility rate of 2 births per woman. Counties that went like 10% for Trump or 20% were like 1.5 births per woman. So a whole half a child difference
Oh boy.
between whether they're a Democrat leading or a Republican leaning county. So it's a huge difference. This, by the way, this didn't used to be the case. Like, it used to be the Democrats and Republicans in the United States had about the same number of children, but like the culture wars have kind of really divided people, and this is a big area where people are really divided. And I think it's very unfortunate, but there is, on the left, there is a subculture that's like straight up anti-natal. Like they
Yeah.
straight up believe that you should not have children. Like nobody should have children. Like, and like people don't really sort of realize like the extent of it unless you look at internet subcultures. But like there's an anti-natal group, a subreddit that has 250,000 members.
Yeah,
So
kid free, child free, whatever. I can't remember the name of all these ones I've seen over the years. I don't understand why that is. There's a number of things to be said about this. Some of them are a little more abrasive than others, but we've all seen these charts of SSRI use in Democrat voters is higher. We've all seen these charts that mental illness and depression and whatnot can be higher in left leaning voters. I'm curious, oh, here we go. If Canada were involved, oh fuck,
yeah.
I know.
No, I mean, here's it's yeah. I mean, this is I think this was I forget which source. It was like what's what's their main Canadian like public news thing?
CBC.
Yeah, this chart is by the CBC, and I think they were like, if only we could.
My
but
God.
but Canada, like Canadian provinces, like the nation of Canada would be like more left than like Vermont, which is like our most left leaning state apparently. So like politically,
You have some comments in the chat here saying Alberta would never vote blue, which may actually be true, but I mean that's still only one of our provinces.
well, I don't know how they did this poll. I don't know how they did this poll, but I don't know. I imagine Trump is not very popular in Canada.
No, he's not. No, he's not.
So maybe this was just a poll on Trump in particular, but it does show, um, that in general, Canada's left wing politics are part of the issue. Because, and I feel, and maybe you can tell me if this is true or not, but I imagine that the American culture war has probably bled into Canada quite a bit.
Sure. Every time we have an election coming up here for the first time in 4 years next year, and campaigning is ramping up as you might expect. And what we've seen is everything from CBC parroting stuff that you hear on CNN and MSNBC about Trump for our conservative candidate. Whether it's talking about him importing MAGA politics, right down, Dan, to our media calling our conservative candidate weird around the same time that it popped up on your side of the border. So truly, we are just like a, what is that? We are a tofu to your culture. We just absorb whatever you guys are doing, and the flavor is very much the same.
It's got to be like feel like very unfair.
It just feels dumb, honestly. I think most
because
voters are immune.
but because the issues that the Canada faces are different. Like these insane housing prices, that's a Canadian issue.
Yeah.
And that's so anyway, we want to talk about some solutions, right?
How do we fix it? Yeah. What can we do? I mean, I said some stuff about incentives, but
yeah, I mean, the first thing you can do, which I try to do, and which we should all try to do, is kind of talk about the problem, because I think people want to do the right thing, and people, in the same way, kind of, and I'm not going to say whether this was good or not. People will have very strong differing opinions, but like, with COVID, everybody was eager to lock down and pitch in and wear masks, and who would have thought, like before COVID lockdowns began, that everybody would be, staying in their house and just wearing a mask and all the time and
A
stuff like
lot
that.
of people, whether you agreed with it after 2 years or not, or 5 years or not, in that first 2 weeks, almost everybody agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, and people were, people want to do the right thing, and actually the thing that's gonna really make the world better in the future is to have kids. That's what the world needs. And so so part of it is just the first thing to do is just to talk about it, to just, help people realize that there's a crisis here, because believe it or not, a lot of people choose not to have kids or have fewer than they would otherwise have, just because they think that the moral thing is like to have less kids. They
Don't
think that
get me
that's
started. I know.
no, but that we hear so much about overpopulation and the environment and stuff, that when actually the pendulum has swung far in the other direction to far too few. But uh you know people are only starting to realize that, and so just talking about that point uh can make all the difference. Because also, if you're married and you have a house, honestly, there's no work. Two is the same as three or four. I mean, the big thing, really, no, I'm serious. So, the big thing is to find somebody, get married, get a house. Now you've done all those things, you know, getting a bigger box of Cheerios at the grocery store is no big deal. It doesn't make any difference at that point. Your life is already wrecked. No, I'm just kidding.
Listen, I've seen a couple of my friends who have 3 kids, and that third one basically raises themselves. Like there's already 2 other ones running
This is the
around
most
doing the bulk of
awesome
the
thing
work.
ever. Is that actually, I think the hardest would be one child, because then the parents have to like play with them all the time.
Yeah.
But 2 kids can like play with each other, and and it's great. And when you have older kids and younger kids, the older ones can really help. And I hope my kids aren't, don't get too frustrated or resentful that, but it's a wonderful, and this is how people did it, that like all through history.
Yeah.
Is that, older siblings helped with the younger ones, and they learned, and it's intergenerational too, because kids learn how to be parents.
Yeah.
My older, we've got 4 kind of more older ones, that are 17 to 12, and then we've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So the older 4, like, they already know how to be parents.
Mhm.
They already know what to do, and it'll be easy for them when, but most, typically, you may have, families might be like 2 kids like 1 year apart, or two kids like 2 years apart, and then neither of them has had the experience of like taking care of a little kid or taking care of a baby. So, like, unless you have a bigger family, kids don't learn that. So, but I think that I think that a big part of the solution is just shifting, to larger families, because so many people will have no kids now, because they'll never meet somebody. They'll never move out of their parents' basement. They'll never, very sad, but they'll never, they won't get to that point in time before their window runs out. So, like, if a third or more of people don't have children, then the remainder have to have like 3 or more, just to balance things out. So that's one thing. Another thing, which we kind of touched upon before, is, kind of religiosity. And I think, religious people, do tend to be, a lot happier, as well. So, people have to kind of turned away from it, but actually people who have a religious community, even if you have a hard time believing, the benefits are still huge, and nobody's going to like do it. Like, nobody's going to like throw you up against the wall and like say, how deeply do you believe this? Like, we think you're just trying to fake it until you make it. Well,
we just think you want to have kids. I don't think you actually believe in any of this stuff.
No, that's fine. I think that's perfectly fine to like kind of go through the motions and try to, some people are more, and the funny thing is, people are into it more or less at different times in their life. Somebody may be going through the motion, and then something significant happens, and then suddenly they're like deeply in it. Or, you can have, but at least you have that community, and you have that structure in your life. And especially because, people are on devices constantly, and this is something I tweeted about like a day or two ago. But like, you have this substitution where people are substituting, sort of virtual spaces and like
Community, right? Fake community
fake
for real
communities.
community. Yeah.
But that's the thing with a religious community is that you have like a huge network of of real life physical friends, which is amazing. And people usually after they're done with high school or college, like that world goes
They're
away,
gone.
and
How
people.
much pickleball do you want to play with the guy next to you in the cubicle farm? My answer is zero, and I'm guessing a lot of people are the same.
Yeah, no, that's right. And so people, you just don't have that community anymore.
No.
But that's where religious communities, offer, so much of the socialization that people needed. And I would be willing to bet that, you look at the world 150 years ago or something when everybody went to church. I don't think everybody was like, a hardcore, you know, you know, believer in every twist of the doctrine. Some were, which is fine, but some people, they just went along with the flow, and their lives were richer for it. So
Yeah.
I think, I think that people don't have to be like, I'd love to believe, but I just can't believe, so I can't, whatever. Just they're not going to kick you out. They're
No.
glad to have you. So just
Well,
take advantage of it.
isn't it true the thing that church and religious communities, I don't want to say church because I think there's other religious communities besides just attending a church, but there is something to this like idea of a meat space community. Unlike the online community where you're united generally against a common enemy, church is really one of the only communities available now where you're united for a common good. And there's no, zero sum thinking during the mass. Father makes some terrible jokes during the homily or whatever. Great. You talk to people in the parking lot after. You share a scone with Ethel. She's made her famous scones again this Sunday. Whatever. That's nice. I gotta tell you, Dan, there's a couple churches here in town, and I tell my wife every time I walk by, I'm telling you, someone's calling me about this building. It's the architecture. This just seems nice. There's like this aura around this church. I know it's nice in there. I used to go, and
Well,
I may
yeah.
not believe, but there's something calling you to that community, and just any community in general. I think that
Yeah,
people don't
you can
appreciate.
kind of you can one thing is people can fake until they make it, or they can just do, kind of, you don't have to believe every single thing to be part of it. That's one thing. But another thing that people can do, which is amazing, which I don't think people felt like they could do before, is that you can kind of try different things.
Mhm.
You don't have to, like, if you, like, in the past you were Protestant, you had to be Protestant. You were Catholic, you had to be Catholic, and you can't, like, this is what you got. But you can just go into, the local Catholic church, and if you like it, if that doesn't jive with you, you can go into the other one, and
Yeah.
you can kind of find something that you like, and so that's amazing. That's something that people really could take more advantage of. Talking about, so that's another point that people can do, of course. Or this is not something that people individually can do, but kind of on a social level, is to build a lot more houses. I shouldn't say housing, because people,
Houses, not units or doors. Houses.
not, yeah, houses,
Yeah.
right. Something with a yard, with, there's the NIMBY movement, not in my backyard, the GIMBY move, the YIMBY movement, which is yes in my backyard, but what we really want is GIMBY, which is grass in my backyard. So you want grass. People need to have their own patch of grass, where and that's the type of housing. But because remember, this housing is going to be around. My house is, I don't know, it's probably like, I think this house is about 60 years old now, which is, at the, but it's you can, these houses are going to be around for 1 or 200 years or something. So
Yeah.
you need to build something that's good for families, because that's what future generations are going to have. And if it's anti-family, then you're going to have a big problem for that's going to be pushing down birth rates for a really, really long time. So I think, and another thing for Canada, which I don't know if this is going to happen, but I think that the immigration level is just completely overwhelming the housing supply. There's just
Is there something to like the immigrant population? Are they just going to have the same problems that I don't want to call them native Canadians, but like the current Canadian crop of young adults has with fertility? Like
yeah, I mean
issues are the
fertility,
same, right?
yeah, for fertility drops incredibly. Fertility is higher for immigrants at the beginning, but it drops very quickly. And they have the same problems as everybody else, that there's just not enough housing. And I mean, you know, you know, immigration has a lot of value, but if the level is so high that you're not able to absorb people, and especially if you don't have the housing stock for it, you're just gonna squeeze out uh, you know births, and meanwhile the immigrants who are coming are going to have very low birth rates also, so it's not even
Mhm.
going to solve the problem that much in terms of like workers and so forth. So yeah, you need that you can't have a level of immigration that's so high that it completely crushes your housing, which is what has happened in Canada.
It's a sad state of affairs up here, buddy. Last question. Last question for you.
All right.
You used the term before we went on the air, demographic collapse. Are we in a situation here in Canada, in your opinion, that is basically irreconcilable at this point? Or do we have to start doing these things now, regardless of where we are? Because if we don't, then it's for sure a doom loop that we're not going
Well,
to get out of.
Canada is not going to like depopulate, and Canada is actually gaining people from a very, very high level of immigration. But
Mhm.
it's the that's right. Canada, there may be some brain drain of other countries, but it's really very hard for young Canadians to make it in that kind of you know cutthroat competition to try to get a house. And that's um so I just don't think that's sustainable. Meanwhile, there are other countries like I think Canada has taken a bunch of Ukrainian immigrants.
Yeah.
For example, you look at the nation of Ukraine, like they have just a total uh you know they actually are facing demographic collapse. Like they have like a very shrinking future. And countries like China, South Korea, these Asian countries that don't have much immigration and extremely low birth rates, that they're the ones that are actually going to face like almost probably economic collapse in the long. I don't want to say like next year or something, but definitely in the long run. I don't see how a country like Korea or even China is going to be able to hold everything together when imagine one worker supporting four
Yeah.
retirees or something. That's just not a reasonable number. So
Well, on that cheery note,
well, it's going to be a difficult problem, but everybody should try to make themselves into an expert on this and try to just internalize that this is the problem that we face. And Elon Musk has said that this is a bigger crisis than the environment. And that'll be offensive to a lot of people to say, because nothing can be a bigger crisis than the environment. But the environment, if the temperature goes up by something, it's not gonna break down economic systems and so forth. But we have to look at also the global scale, because you know as I was saying, the countries that make all the chips, which is Korea and Taiwan, those places are in total collapse. And how are we all want to imagine like our future as some kind of like Star Trek type futuristic thing. But if the countries that are most technological are the ones that are in demographic collapse, then how are you going to get the Star Trek future that
there
everybody?
is no Star Trek future, Dan. Yeah.
No, yeah, I don't know how Elon Musk keeps these two opposite things, because he's trying to go for the stars, but he also knows these demographic realities. So I don't know if he just compartmentalizes or what.
But there's a lot going on, I think, for a lot of different people in a lot of different silos these days, between work and family, the struggles of the dopamine feeder in your pocket, and fitness and hormonal birth control, education, the lack of understanding about the seriousness of the problem. Dan, you've been a great guest. I'm glad we set this up. I want you to tell people where they can find out more about you, your work, More Births. The floor is all yours.
Yes. So yeah, more births on Twitter. It's a very simple handle. I got retweeted by Mr. Musk himself twice in the last week, which is really which is really awesome because all of a sudden, and what I do is I post and ghost, which means I really work hard on, sometimes on some of these essays or some of these posts, and then I just log off and don't look. And so I didn't look for like 18 hours, and like followers were popping up on my in my notifications, but I just didn't. And then 18 hours later, I look and like this thing that so that was it's very, but do give me a follow if you want to learn more. And I just also added morebirths.com. So that's a Substack that's going to try to put my research together. And I'm going to try to organize that because I've really put a lot of stuff out there over the last year and a half. But it's, you'd have to kind of dig through my feed to find it all. So I'm going to try to organize that. And everybody should become an expert on this because this is coming. And, the most important, we're really going to have to orient all of society toward having children more, because it seems like the default is just too low. But it is possible to turn things around. You look at a nation like Israel, that is one example. There's a few countries where they just prioritize that. Mongolia is another one. There's different countries around the world that really just socially emphasize, they just value having children very, very highly. And we're going to have to start doing that across society to just prioritize it much higher than we have been. And I think we can solve it.
Make sure you follow your wife's bed tonight, boys. Okay. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, take care of yourselves.
Thanks so much.